I'm Charles Wilson, Staff Product Cybersecurity Architect at Torque Robotics. This presentation will cover an overview of deprecated function handling. This diagram shows the overall AVCDL training path. If you're taking this training, it's assumed that you've already completed the AVCDL overview training, and additionally, that you've completed the requirements taxonomy, security requirements, secure design principles, apply secure design, and secure settings trainings. This training will cover an overview of deprecated function handling. Within the context of product cybersecurity, deprecated functions may well be the least appreciated area that we take into consideration. If you look at things like attack surface analysis or secure code review, it's obvious to most people that these are areas that we should be giving attention to. When it comes to things like deprecated functions, however, we're met with a level of resistance that we don't see in many other places. Traditionally, the software development approach has been one of, if it isn't broken, don't fix it. Simply because something works doesn't mean it has no vulnerabilities. Let's consider a good example where we have something that's traditional and has been known to work and yet is not what we would consider by today's standards to be safe. This is the classic straight razor. It's been used for shaving for thousands of years. It does the job beautifully when in the hands of someone who has mastered the technique of utilizing it. When it's in the hands of someone who is not well versed, it can lead to all sorts of unfortunate situations. Worse yet are the results when it's in the hands of someone who has malicious intent. Collectively, we looked at this problem and came up with an alternative, which we see represented here. Does the same work as the straight razor does? This is, of course, the oscillating electric razor. It operates in a way which is unquestionably safer. Additionally, it's easier to master. So how does this relate to software functions? We can have a function that was created decades ago that we still use. It does its tasks as expected, but it's been determined that it has a vulnerability. If the vulnerability is leveraged, it may become a threat to the system. It's not that the function isn't doing its task, it's that the function can be misused or abused, leading to the compromise of the system's cybersecurity. What we would like to do is replace these functions with ones which are not subject to the vulnerabilities of the current ones. With this motivating example out of the way, let's look at the workflow involved in the handling of deprecated functions. The workflow for performing the deprecated functions handling process is broken down into 4 discrete activities. These are identifying the deprecated functions, incorporating the scan, performing the scan, and finally, conducting a triage of the issues identified by the scan. Now let's turn our attention to each of these activities and get into some more detail. The first activity in the deprecated functions process is that of identifying the deprecated functions themselves. The cybersecurity SME will look at the authoritative sources and identify the deprecated functions called out in them. These will be compiled into a deprecated functions list. From that list, an identified deprecated functions report will be created. When doing this, it's important that the SME focus on a single language targeting a single platform. This allows better management of how we're going to handle the deprecated functions, and if things change over time, that's going to be a lot simpler to track. The second activity in the deprecated functions handling process is that of incorporating the scan into the build system. The DevOps SME takes the deprecated functions list, the element to be scanned, and the build file, and makes the changes necessary to the build file to enable scanning. And the result of this is an updated build file. There are 2 things that we need to consider here. The first is the tooling used. The mechanism used to perform the scan could be anything from a piece of standard software that's already in use, to a simple regular expression. Our second consideration is that of dependencies. We don't want to waste time scanning code which we have no control over. The third activity in the deprecated functions handling process is that of performing the scan. The updated build file is going to invoke the tool used to take the element under consideration and scan for deprecated functions. This will yield a scan output file. Ideally, this is done within the context of the CI/CD pipeline and without manual intervention. Now, it is possible to do this manually. This is true with all automation. We don't have automation until we can perform the task by hand. And so, just because we see these activities which don't show an explicit actor, that doesn't mean that it's not possible for an actor to invoke the tooling that's been set up in order to perform this particular task. The final activity in the deprecated function handling process, as with so many AVCDL processes, is that of triage. The cybersecurity SME and the development SME take the scan output and triage it. Any deprecated functions correctly identified will be added to an identified issues list and passed along to be addressed. Finally, a currently used deprecated functions report will be produced. There are two things we want to keep in mind here. The first is that the identified issues may be filed immediately if they're in obvious need of correction. Only those issues requiring additional review need go to the threat prioritization process. Second, if we have tool false positives where the scanner is identifying functions inappropriately, those issues should be rejected, and either the source or the scoping of the scan needs to be adjusted. Now let's take a moment to talk about the report. At this point, we've triaged the results of the scan and identified those issues which need further attention. Either they're going into the threat prioritization process or directly into issue tracking. We've also identified those outputs from the scan which are false positives and need to be dealt with. The results of the triage now need to be put into a human-readable form. And when we're talking about the issues, we're going to be encoding these, ideally as SARIF, because that gives us a common way to move things through the CI/CD pipeline. The report will cover the element, the particular deprecated function found, and where it was found within the element. It will be grouped to show the issues that need to be addressed, followed by those we're not going to address. This will be covered in detail in the triage activity material. It's also addressed in the report generation elaboration material. That's an overview of the process used in handling deprecated functions. Now let's review what's been covered. Stepping through our process, we want to identify the deprecated functions, incorporate scanning into the pipeline for particular elements. Next, we want to scan the source code for the deprecated functions and triage the results. Things to keep in mind here are that you want to start small and expand, as with all things we do within the context of cybersecurity. And more importantly, we want to report the findings because that's the goal of this particular activity. For more information and to get a more in-depth set of references, the currently used Deprecated Functions Document, secondary document, is available in the AVCDL GitHub repository. All AVCDL materials, both in source and distribution forms, are available on our GitHub site, as shown here. Because of the size of the repository, it's recommended that you either clone the repository or download a zip archive of it if you're not familiar with using Git. Instructions for downloading a zip archive are linked to on the repository's front page. Videos covering various aspects of the AVCDL are available on our YouTube channel, as shown here. It's important to note that all AVCDL materials, except for the introductory blog posts, are intended for product cybersecurity engineering practitioners. With this training complete, once you've completed the other deprecated functions trainings, you can proceed to the other trainings at this level. These include code reuse, and secure coding. Here are the references to the source material used in the creation of this presentation. They'll also be included in the video description. Additionally, this presentation's source material will be provided on the AVCDL GitHub repository.